What would drive an inexperienced American multimillionaire to leave comfort behind and attempt to sail solo around the world aboard a tiny Catalina 22? In this video, we dive into the astonishing story of ambition, naivety, and sheer determination. As one man took on the vast oceans alone in one of the smallest sailboats ever dared for such a monumental challenge, this isn't just a story of adventure. It's a powerful lesson in the realities of inexperience, the harshness of the sea, and the critical choices that can mean the difference between survival and disaster. We'll explore the mistakes, the unexpected dangers, and the hard-earned insights that emerged from his attempt to conquer the world's oceans alone. Imagine being alone with limited skills and a 22-foot boat facing the endless, unpredictable sea. Throughout this video, we'll reveal what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and what every sailor, especially beginners, can learn from this bold but risky endeavor. So, get ready for a gripping journey full of cautionary tales, vital lessons, and the raw truth behind what it takes and what it really means to face the ocean alone. Stay until the end and tell us, what would you do if you found yourself in a Catalina 22, far from shore and out of your depth? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more eye-opening stories and sailing wisdom. Let's set sail! The sun hung low over Miami's Biscayne Bay, painting the water in hues of gold and crimson. Jonathan Hastings, John, to his few friends, stood on the dock, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his pristine sailing jacket. At 45, he was lean, with a boyish face that belied the millions he'd made selling his tech startup. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray, fluttered in the warm breeze. Around him, the marina buzzed. Yachts bobbed gently, their halyards clinking against masts, while seasoned sailors swapped stories of gales and glassy seas. John didn't belong here, not yet, but he was determined to change that. His boat, a Catalina 22 named Second Chance, sat tethered to the dock, its white hull gleaming under the Florida sun. At just 21.5 feet, it was dwarfed by the sleek cruisers and towering ketches around it. John had chosen it impulsively, charmed by its compact size and the salesman's pitch about its versatility. He'd read somewhere that small boats could be just as seaworthy as big ones, and the idea of simplicity appealed to him. No crew, no complications, just him, the sea, and a dream to sail around the world, alone. He'd spent months preparing, or so he thought. Books on navigation piled high in his waterfront condo, their pages dog-eared, but barely understood. He'd taken a weekend sailing course, fumbled with knots, and watched countless videos on rigging. His gear was top of the line: a new VHF radio, a handheld GPS, a solar panel jury-rigged to the stern, and enough freeze-dried meals to last weeks. He'd even packed a sextant, though he hadn't quite mastered celestial navigation. How hard could it be? The ocean was vast, but the world was round. He'd figure it out. The plan was ambitious: sail from Miami to the Bahamas, cut through the Caribbean, transit the Panama Canal, cross the Pacific to the Galapagos and Polynesia, then onward to Australia, the Indian Ocean, South Africa, and back across the Atlantic. A circumnavigation. He'd mapped it out on a glossy chart spread across his dining table, tracing the route with a finger, imagining the ports, the stars, the freedom. The Catalina 22 wasn't built for this, he knew that much. Its shallow draft and light displacement made it nimble for coastal hops, not ocean crossings. But John was stubborn. If others could sail tiny boats across oceans, so could he. He stepped. Aboard Second Chance, the deck creaking under his weight. The cockpit was cramped, barely room for him and his duffel of clothes. Below, the cabin was a claustrophobic nook with a V-berth, a tiny galley, and a chemical toilet he hoped never to use. He checked the rigging, running his hands along the ship. Stays, mimicking the confident motions he'd seen other sailors perform. The mainsail was furled, the jib neatly bagged. He'd practiced raising them in the marina, though the wind had been light, and he'd had a dockhand nearby. Out there, it would be different. The tide was turning, and the weather looked fair, a light southeast breeze, clear skies. He'd checked the forecast obsessively, knowing hurricanes were a risk this time of year, but the models showed a calm window enough to get him to the Bahamas, his first stop. From there, he'd island hop to Puerto Rico, then south to Panama. Easy, he told himself, one leg at a time. He untied the dock lines, his heart pounding. The engine, a small outboard, sputtered to life. He motored out of the marina, waving awkwardly at a grizzled sailor who watched from a nearby ketch. The man didn't wave back. John didn't care. He was doing this. As the skyline of Miami shrank behind him, he cut the engine and raised the mainsail. The canvas caught the wind, and Second Chance heeled slightly, slicing through the gentle swell. John grinned, gripping the tiller. This was it. The adventure had begun. The first few hours were blissful. The sea sparkled, dolphins arced alongside, and the wind held steady at 10 knots. John trimmed the sails, feeling a flicker of pride as the boat settled into a rhythm. He'd read about finding the groove, thus, and this must be it. He set a course for Bimini, about 50 nautical miles east, using the GPS and a paper chart as backup. The compass swung lazily in its binnacle. He munched on a protein bar, the salt air sharp on his tongue. This was what he'd dreamed of: freedom, solitude, the world at his command, but the sea is a fickle host. By late afternoon, the wind began to freshen, kicking up choppy waves that slapped against the hull. The sky, once clear, now held a smudge of gray on the horizon. John frowned, checking his handheld weather radio. A squall moving fast from the southeast. Not a hurricane, but enough to make things hairy. He'd read about reefing, reducing, sail to handle stronger winds, but he'd never done it under pressure. The boat was heeling hard now, the rail dipping close to the water. His stomach churned. He scrambled to the mast, clipping his tether to the jackline he'd installed. The deck was slick, the boat pitching as waves broke over the bow. He fumbled with the halyard, lowering the mainsail part way, then wrestled with the reefing lines. His fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, slipped on the knots. The sail flapped wildly, and for a moment he thought it might tear. Finally, he secured the reef points. The sail now smaller, tauter. The boat stabilized, but the wind was up to 20 knots, and the squall was closing in. Rain came first, a stinging sheet that blurred his vision. Then the wind howled, gusting to 30 knots. Waves, maybe 6 feet high, rolled under Second Chance, lifting her stern and dropping her into troughs. John clung to the tiller, his knuckles white. The boat was overpowered, even with the reefed main. He needed to drop the jib, but that meant leaving the cockpit. Alone, with no autopilot, he couldn't risk it. Instead, he tried to heave to, a technique he'd read about to stall the boat in heavy weather. He backed the jib and lashed the tiller to leeward, but the Catalina wasn't cooperating. She kept falling off, broadsiding the waves. Panic crept in. The GPS showed him drifting, off course, pushed north by the storm. Bimini was still 20 miles away, unreachable in these conditions. He switched on the VHF, hailing for help, but the static-filled response was unintelligible. He was alone, truly alone, in a boat too small for this kind of sea. The cockpit was awash, his gear sliding as the boat lurched. A wave broke over the stern, soaking him to the bone. He cursed his arrogance, his money, his stupid dream. But John wasn't a quitter. He'd built a company from nothing, faced down boardroom battles and sleepless nights. This was just another problem to solve. He crawled below, grabbing a bucket to bail the cockpit. The cabin was a mess, books and cans strewn across the floor, but he ignored it. Back in the cockpit, he bailed furiously, the cold water numbing his hands. The storm was peaking, but he noticed the waves were more rhythmic now, less chaotic. He checked the GPS again. He was still afloat, still moving, just not where he'd planned. He decided to run with the storm, steering downwind to reduce the strain on the boat. It was risky. Too much speed could pitch-pole the boat, flipping her end over end, but he had no choice. He eased the mainsail, letting Second Chance surf the waves. The motion was terrifying, the stern lifting high, then sliding down into the Iha troughs. But it worked. The boat felt alive, responsive. For the first time, John felt a flicker of connection with her, as if she was fighting alongside him. Hours later, the squall passed. The wind dropped to 15 knots, the rain softened to a drizzle. John collapsed in the cockpit, exhausted, but exhilarated. He'd survived. The GPS showed he was closer to Bimini than he'd thought, maybe 15 miles. The stars were out now, piercing the clearing sky. He dug out his sextant, more for morale than necessity, and tried to take a sight. The numbers made no sense, but the act grounded him. He reset his course, raised the jib, and sailed on. Bimini appeared at dawn, a low smudge of green against the turquoise sea. John motored into Alistown, his hands shaking as he tied up at the marina. The dockmaster, a wiry man with a sun-creased face, eyed Second Chance with a mix of amusement and respect. "You came from Miami in that?" he asked, jerking a thumb at the boat. John nodded, too tired to explain. He stumbled to a bar, ordered a beer, and sat staring at the water. He'd made it, one leg down, but the storm had shaken him. He wasn't ready, not for the Caribbean, not for the Pacific, not for the world. He spent 3 days in Bimini, reprovisioning and tinkering with the boat. The outboard needed a new spark plug, and he found a tear in the jib that he patched with sail tape. He bought extra water jugs, realizing his 10-gallon supply wouldn't cut it for longer legs. Locals offered advice, some skeptical, others encouraging. One old sailor, nursing a rum at the bar, told him about the trade winds and the importance of timing the seasons. "You're nuts to do this in a 22-footer, he said, "but nuts ain't always bad." John laughed, but the words stuck. The next leg was to San Juan, Puerto Rico, about 900 miles southeast. The route would take him through the Bahamas Exuma chain, then across the open Atlantic, skirting the Turks and Caicos. He'd read about the Caribbean's beauty, coral reefs, turquoise lagoons, but also its dangers, sudden squalls, shallow banks, and the looming threat of hurricanes. He checked the weather again, plotting his departure for a calm window. The marina buzzed with other sailors, their boats loaded for long voyages. John felt a pang of envy for their experience, their ease, but he pushed it down. He'd learn by doing. He left Bimini at first light, the sea flat and the wind a gentle 12 knots. The Exumas were stunning, islands of white sand and emerald water. He anchored off Great Exuma, snorkeling in the warm shallows, feeling like an explorer. But the open water beyond was daunting. The leg to Puerto Rico would take 7 to 10 days, his longest yet. He stocked extra food, cans of beans, rice, and more protein bars, and rigged a tarp to collect rainwater, a trick he'd picked up from a sailing forum. His solar panel kept the batteries charged, powering the GPS and radio. He was as ready as he'd ever be. The first few days were smooth, the trade winds pushing Second Chance at a steady 4 knots. John settled into a routine. Sail by day, hove to at night to rest, checking his position hourly. He saw other boats occasionally, freighters mostly, their lights glowing on the horizon. Loneliness crept in, but he fought it with music from a waterproof speaker and journaling in a waterproof notebook. He wrote about the sea, the stars, his fears. "I don't know if I'm crazy or brave," he scrawled one night. Maybe both. On the 5th day, trouble struck. The wind shifted, blowing hard from the northeast against his course. The seas built, 8-foot waves that rolled Second Chance like a toy. John reefed early this time, but the boat was struggling, her light hull slamming into the troughs. Worse, the jib halyard snapped, the sail collapsing into the sea. John cursed, clipping on his tether and crawling forward. The deck was awash, waves breaking over him. He hauled the sodden sail aboard, his arms burning, and secured it with bungees. Without the jib, the boat was unbalanced, wallowing in the swell. He jury-rigged a solution, hoisting a smaller storm jib he'd bought on a whim. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him enough drive to keep moving. The repair took hours, his hands raw from the lines. He was soaked, exhausted, and miles off course. The GPS showed him drifting south toward the Dominican Republic. He adjusted his heading, fighting the wind. The storm jib held, but the boat was taking a beating. He bailed. The cockpit again, noticing water seeping into the cabin. A leak somewhere below the waterline. His heart sank. He pumped the bilge manually, the handle stiff with salt. The leak was slow, but it was there. He couldn't find it in the dark, not with the boat pitching. He'd have to wait for daylight, hope it didn't worsen. He lashed. The tiller crawled below and wedged himself into the V-berth. Sleep was impossible, the boat creaking and groaning. He thought of Miami, his old life, the safety of his condo. Why was he doing this? The money, the success, it hadn't been enough. He wanted meaning, something to prove he was more than a bank account. But the sea didn't care about his reasons. Dawn brought calmer seas, the wind easing to 15 knots. John found the leak, a cracked through-hull fitting near the head. He patched it with epoxy and duct tape, a temporary fix. He'd need a proper repair in San Juan. The storm jib was still up, the boat limping along at 3 knots. He was behind schedule, low on water, and battered. But Puerto Rico was close. Maybe 2 days if the wind held. He ate a cold can of beans, checked his course, and kept going. San Juan's harbor was a welcome sight, the old fort of El Morro looming over the entrance. John motored in, the outboard coughing, but loyal. He tied up at a marina, his legs wobbly as he stepped onto the dock. The harbor master raised an eyebrow at second chance. "You sailed that from the Bahamas?" he asked. John nodded, managing a weak smile. He'd made it again. But the journey was just beginning. The Panama Canal was next. Then the Pacific, a beast he couldn't yet fathom. He spent a week in San Juan, repairing the boat and himself. The through-hull was replaced, the jib halyard fixed, the sails inspected. He bought more supplies, studied charts for the canal, and listened to sailors' tales at the marina bar. Some laughed at his plan, others admired his guts. "You'll need more than guts for the Pacific," one said. "That ocean's bigger than your dreams." John nodded, but inside he burned. He'd prove them wrong. As he prepared to leave, a hurricane warning flickered on the radio. The season was turning, the Caribbean growing restless. He'd have to move fast, stay ahead of the storms. He checked his gear one last time, cast off, and pointed second chance south. The sea stretched endless before him, beautiful and brutal. He was still an amateur, still out of his depth, but he was learning, wave by wave, mile by mile. The world was waiting, and John Hastings wasn't turning back. The marina in San Juan hummed with life, a cacophony of clinking halyards and shouted Spanish. Jonathan Hastings sat in the cockpit of Second Chance, his Catalina 22, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos. The boat was patched up, new through hull fitting, repaired jib halyard, sails inspected, but John felt less certain. The hurricane warning on the radio lingered in his mind. The season was turning, and the Caribbean was no place to linger. He needed to move south fast to reach the Panama Canal before the weather closed in. From there, the Pacific awaited, vast and unforgiving. He traced the route on his chart: Curacao, Colombia's coast, then the canal. 1,000 miles, maybe? More. His hands, still raw from the last leg, tightened around the mug. He'd learned hard lessons since Miami. The squall off Bimini had taught him respect for the sea's power. The broken halyard en route to Puerto Rico had shown him his limits. He wasn't a sailor, not like the weathered men and women in the marina, their boats scarred from years at sea. But he was stubborn, and the dream of circling the globe alone drove him. He checked his supplies, 15 gallons of water in jugs, cans of food stacked in the tiny cabin, a spare solar panel lashed to the deck. The outboard was serviced, its fuel tank full. He'd even bought a cheap drogue, a cone-shaped device to slow the boat in heavy seas, after reading about it in a dog-eared manual. Ready or not, it was time to go. He cast off at dawn, the sky streaked with pink. The wind was light, 8 knots from the east, perfect for a downwind run to Curacao, 450 miles away. Second Chance glided out of San Juan's harbor, the old fort fading behind him. John raised the mainsail and jib, settling into the familiar rhythm of trimming and steering. The sea was kind, a gentle swell rocking the boat. He set the tiller with a bungee to hold course, a trick he'd picked up from a sailor in Bimini. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of confidence. Maybe he could do this. The passage to Curacao was uneventful at first. The trade winds held, pushing Second Chance at a steady 4 knots. John navigated by GPS, cross-checking with his compass and charts. He saw flying fish skimming the waves, their silver bodies, glinting in the sun. At night, he hove to, drifting under a sky ablaze with stars. He tried the sextant again, fumbling with the almanac, but gave up after an hour. The GPS was enough for now. He slept in snatches, waking to check the sails, and bilge. Loneliness gnawed at him, but he filled the silence with a battered paperback, reading by headlamp. On the third day, the wind died. The sea turned glassy, reflecting the sun like a mirror. Second Chance wallowed, her sails slatting uselessly. John checked the weather radio, a high-pressure system stalling the trades. He cursed, scanning the horizon for any ripple of breeze. His water was down to 10 gallons, and Curacao was still 200 miles off. He couldn't afford to drift for days. The outboard had enough fuel for maybe 50 miles, not enough to motor the whole way. He needed wind or a plan. He remembered a trick from a sailing forum, using the dinghy as a tow. He'd brought a small inflatable, stowed, deflated in the cabin. It was a desperate idea, but he was desperate. He inflated the dinghy, tied it to the bow with a long line, and rowed ahead of Second Chance, pulling her like a mule towing a barge. His arms burned after an hour, sweat stinging his eyes. The boat moved, but barely, a knot, maybe less. It was absurd, a multimillionaire rowing in the middle of the Caribbean, but it kept him moving. He rowed until dusk, then collapsed in the cockpit, his shoulders screaming. The GPS showed he'd gained 10 miles. Not enough, but something. The wind returned the next morning, a faint breeze that grew to 12 knots. John stowed the dinghy, raised the sails, and surged toward Curacao. He laughed, a ragged sound, at the absurdity of it all. The island appeared. On the 5th day, its colorful buildings a welcome sight. He anchored off Willemstad, too tired to deal with the marina's paperwork. He swam ashore, bought water and food, and slept for 12 hours straight. Curacao was a brief respite, but the clock was ticking. The hurricane season was closing in, and the canal was still 600 miles away. The leg to Colombia's coast was rougher. The Caribbean current, a powerful westward flow, pushed Second Chance off course, forcing John to crab at an angle to maintain his heading. The wind was stronger now, 15 to 20 knots, kicking up 6-foot seas. The Catalina handled it, but John was constantly adjusting the sails, his hands blistered from the sheets. He hit a squall off Aruba, rain so thick he couldn't see the bow. He dropped the jib and ran under reefed main, the boat surfing down. Waves. A line fouled in the cockpit, jamming the tiller. John crawled forward, knife in hand, cutting it free as waves broke over him. He was soaked, shivering, but the boat kept moving. He reached Santa Marta, Colombia, after 7 days, anchoring in a crowded bay. The town was vibrant, but John was too exhausted to explore. He repaired the fouled line, checked the rigging, and bought more fuel. Locals warned him about the canal, bureaucracy, fees, and the need for a pilot. He'd read about it but hadn't grasped the complexity. He needed to transit soon, before the weather turned. He set out for Colon, Panama, 300 miles away, praying for fair winds. The passage was brutal. The wind veered to the north against him, and the current was relentless. Second Chance pounded into head seas, her bow slamming with every wave. John was seasick for the first time, retching over the side. The bilge pump clogged and water sloshed in the cabin again. He cleared it with a screwdriver, cursing his inexperience. On the third day, the solar panel's wiring shorted, killing his battery. The GPS died, leaving him with only the compass and charts. He hadn't practiced dead reckoning, and his position was a guess. Panic rose, but he forced it down. He steered, by the sun and stars, praying he was close. Colon appeared like a mirage, its breakwater a gray line against the sea. John motored in, the outboard gasping on its last drops of fuel. The marina was chaotic, freighters and yachts jockeying for space. He hired an agent to handle the canal paperwork, a necessity he hadn't anticipated. The transit took days to arrange: inspections, fees, a pilot assigned to guide him through the locks. John used the time to fix the solar panel, rewire the battery, and stock up. The canal was a bottleneck, but beyond it lay the Pacific, the biggest test yet. The transit was surreal. Second Chance was dwarfed by tankers, her 22 feet comical in the massive locks. The pilot, a quiet Panamanian named Luis, eyed the boat skeptically, but said nothing. John handled the lines, sweating as the locks filled, lifting the boat like an elevator. Luis gave terse orders: adjust the fenders, ease the bowline. John complied, his heart racing. The Gatun Lake crossing was calmer, a surreal freshwater oasis. By dusk, they reached the Pacific side, anchoring off Balboa. Luis shook John's hand, a rare smile. "Good luck," he said. "You'll need it." The Pacific was a new world. John sailed for the Galapagos, 900 miles southwest, under steady trade winds. The sea was deeper, the swells longer, rolling under Second Chance like gentle hills. He settled into a rhythm, sailing by day, drifting at night. The isolation was profound. No ships, no land, just water and sky. He talked to himself, to the boat, to the dolphins that followed him. His water was holding, thanks to the tarp he'd rigged to catch rain. But the boat was showing wear. The rudder was loose, creaking with every turn. He tightened the bolts, but it was a temporary fix. The Galapagos appeared after 10 days, volcanic islands shrouded in mist. John anchored off Santa Cruz, awed by the wildlife: iguanas, sea lions, birds he couldn't name. He stayed a week, reprovisioning and repairing the rudder. Locals were kind but curious. "You're crossing the Pacific in that?" a fisherman asked, pointing at Second Chance. John nodded, used to the disbelief. The next leg was the longest yet, 3,000 miles to the Marquesas, a month at sea. He bought extra water, 20 gallons now, and every can of food he could fit. The cabin was a sardine tin, but he'd need it all. The Pacific crossing was a crucible. The first week was idyllic, 15-knot trades and clear skies. John sailed wing on wing. The mainsail and jib pulled out, Second Chance gliding at 5 knots. But the ocean's mood shifted. A low-pressure system brought 25-knot winds and 10-foot seas. John reefed, then dropped the jib entirely, running under bare poles as waves broke over the stern. The drogue helped, slowing the boat, but the cockpit was a swimming pool. He bailed for hours, his arms leaden. The rudder creaked louder, and he feared it would snap. He reinforced it with spare lines, lashing it to the transom. It held barely. Water became a crisis. A jug sprang a leak, soaking his food. He was down to 5 gallons with weeks to go. He rationed 1 liter a day. His throat parched. Rain came, but not enough. He licked dew from the sails, desperate. The GPS flickered, the battery weak despite the solar panel. He navigated by compass, his chart stained and curling. Fatigue blurred his thoughts. He saw things, lights on the horizon, voices in the wind. He wrote in his journal, "I'm not sure I'll make it, but I can't stop." The Marquesas appeared on the 31st day, jagged peaks rising from the sea. John wept, steering for Hiva-Oa. He anchored in a bay, the water so clear he could see fish darting below. He rowed ashore, legs wobbling, and bought water, fruit, bread. The islanders were welcoming, their French-accented English a bomb. He stayed. 2 weeks, repairing the boat and himself. The rudder needed a proper fix, but he made do with epoxy and bolts. He was halfway around the world, but the hardest parts, Australia, the Indian Ocean, the Cape, were still ahead. The leg to Tahiti, 700 miles, was a reprieve. The trades were kind, the sea calm. John sailed past atolls, their reefs glowing turquoise. He anchored off Papita, dazzled by the markets and mountains. But the boat was suffering. The hull had micro cracks, the rigging was frayed. He patched what he could, knowing a yard overhaul was impossible. He pressed on to Australia, 3,500 miles away, a 40-day slog. The Pacific grew moody, squalls alternating with calms. John's water ran low again, forcing him to distill seawater with a makeshift solar still, a plastic sheet over a pot, collecting condensation. It was slow, but it kept him alive. Australia's coast was a triumph, the Great Barrier Reef, a labyrinth of beauty and danger. John anchored off Cairns, his body gaunt, his beard wild. He'd lost 20 pounds, his clothes hanging loose. The marina staff stared at Second Chance, her hull stained, her sails patched. "Mate, you sailed that from America?" a dockhand asked. John nodded, too tired to elaborate. He rested a month, repairing the boat and planning the Indian Ocean crossing. The Cape of Good Hope loomed, its reputation for storms daunting. He bought a heavier drogue, more epoxy, and every spare part he could afford. The Indian Ocean was a beast. John aimed for Mauritius, 4,000 miles away, battling variable winds and heavy seas. A gale hit halfway, 35-knot winds and 15-foot waves. Second Chance was overwhelmed, her rail buried. John deployed the drogue, but it tangled, useless. He cut it free, running before the storm, steering by feel as waves towered behind. The rudder snapped, the bolts sheared. John lashed a spare oar to the transom, a crude steering rig. It worked, barely, the boat slewing wildly. He survived the gale, but the damage was done. He limped to Mauritius, jury-rigging repairs with wire and tape. The Cape of Good Hope was the final gauntlet. John sailed for South Africa, 2,800 miles, under gray skies. The Agulhas Current, a roaring river in the sea, pushed him north against his course. Storms rolled through, one after another. A wave broached Second Chance, rolling her 90 degrees. John was thrown across the cockpit, his head striking the coaming. He saw stars, blood trickling down his face. The boat righted, but the cabin was a chaos. Gear smashed, water everywhere. He bailed, patched, kept going. The Cape appeared, a jagged silhouette, after 30 days. He rounded it at night, winds howling, waves crashing. He screamed into the gale, defiant. The Atlantic was a homecoming, but not a rest. John sailed for St. Helena, 1,700 miles, then the Caribbean, 3,000 more. His body was breaking, cracked ribs, infected cuts, exhaustion so deep he hallucinated. Second Chance was a wreck, her hull leaking, her sails threadbare. Yet she sailed on, as stubborn as her skipper. John reached Florida after 18 months, anchoring off Miami, the skyline a dreamlike echo of his start. He stepped ashore, knees buckling, and kissed the dock. He'd done it, circumnavigated. Alone, John sat in a bar that night, a beer untouched. Before him, he was changed, gaunt, weathered, his eyes older than his 46 years. The sea had stripped him bare, shown him his limits, his strength. He'd write a book, maybe, or teach others to sail. The dream wasn't what he'd expected, but it was his. Second chance bobbed at the marina, battered but unbroken. John raised his glass to her, to the sea, to the man he'd become. The world was round, and he'd sailed it all.